Thank you and welcome to our annual Question Time event. My name is Teresa Chalmers. I'm delighted to be here chairing this morning's activity, and I'd like to welcome our honoured guests this morning. On my left here I have Councillor Stephen Brady from the Labour Group. I also have Councillor Fairham from the Conservative and Unionist Group. Indeed. I have Councillor Ross on my right hand side, who's a Liberal Democrat member, and we are expecting Keith actually to come. Keith Russell from the Warren, who usually does appear. We haven't had his apologies, so we're expecting him to join us very shortly. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to the actual questions themselves. And the first category that has been raised has been employment and youth unemployment. And I'd like to go to Sam Allison from the plumbing course to raise his question. Sam, can you put your hand up, please?
I'm on a level 1 course and I would need an apprenticeship by May 2011. Will the recession prevent me from doing this?
Okay. Councillor Brady, would you like to kick off with that one, please?
Yeah, thank you. Well, this government have took a huge risk, and particularly with apprenticeships and employment for young people. And if anybody was watching when the budget announcements were made about the cuts in spending right throughout the country, the look of glee on the Conservative faces and the Liberal Democrats patting each other on the back on taking away opportunities for many people throughout the country. I think it's an absolute disgrace that they haven't hit the people who actually caused this recession, i.e. the banking section, which they took grave risks with our economy. And I'm afraid that the future looks quite bleak. However, all I'd say to young people is to just keep on trying. Life is hard, and I'm sure you'll come through at the end. The main thing is to get the right apprenticeship and to keep on trying.
Thank you for that, Councillor Brady. Would you like to make a comment there, Councillor Ross?
Well, first of all, if I can just say thank you very much for the invite to this morning's event. I'm pleased to hear it described as the highlights of the week. Not often we get described as being highlight of a week as a group of politicians. Interesting answer from Councillor Brady. He starts off, first of all, with the words "this government." I think that'll be a theme for this morning. He's waited 13 years to be able to attack a government as a Labour politician. Now he gets his chance. Of course, he's kind of off the mark, both in the answer to the question and just generally. The question about apprenticeships, listen, I don't know what your circumstances are, so to talk in particular is perhaps unwise, but in terms of the issue of apprenticeships, then clearly we do need to make sure that those are there. And I think actually there is a commitment from this government to make sure that young people in this country are able to get the skills they need. And we've seen actually in the announcement that took place on Wednesday, and I'd just like to correct Councillor Brady, it was a comprehensive spending review. It was a review of the spending that needs to take place, and it was to look in detail at those spending. It wasn't a budget, it was to look properly at what needs to be done. And was making sure that investment goes where it's needed, and young people are at the forefront of where the investment's taking place in this country.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. If we can move on to our next question, do we have Beth Beaumont, please, from the Cash Group?
What is the future after studying at Hull College? Will there be employment for all?
Okay, thank you, Beth. Did everybody hear Beth's question?
Yeah.
Beth asked, what is the future after studying at Hull College? Will there be employment for all? I'd like to take this question to Councillor Fairham, please.
If I knew what the future was, I wouldn't be in politics, because all we try and do is shape the future. To answer the question, will there be employment for all? No, frankly. I may as well be honest, I'm not here to lie to you. With Hull running at higher than the national unemployment already, if I were to say yes, there will be employment for all, then I'd be lying, because the evidence shows there isn't already. So there won't be in the future. What there will be, though, is employment for people with skills, people who actually have social skills, employment skills are actually suited for employment. The CBI recently commented that 48% of graduates that come out of university are barely capable of stringing written sentences together and aren't even numerate. So it doesn't necessarily follow it's all going to be about education. A lot of it will be skills-based, and that is probably the future for this country, is being based around skills. It's the unskilled labour is probably not going to get jobs at the end of it all.
Thank you. Do you feel that that question's been adequately answered, Beth?
Even if you like it.
Well, where does that leave all us lot then? Where does it leave us all? If we've got no jobs and there's not going to be no jobs, and then you're taking money off people as well, you're reducing the money, so it's leaving us without money and without jobs.
I didn't say there'd be no jobs, and I'm disappointed that you think you won't have a job. What I said was there wouldn't be employment for all. There aren't, no.
These people, obviously, leaving the world, but there's a lot more people coming in the world as well, and there's not enough jobs for everyone now, to make sure there's not going to be enough jobs. Yeah, when we all leave college.
As I said, there won't be enough jobs to go around. That's what I've already just said. With jobs being outsourced to go, well, I could sit here and tell you, and if you actually were stupid enough to believe me when I said I rest my case. If you were stupid enough to believe me if I said you were all going to have jobs and everybody was going to have a job, then you would prove me the liar right now. But the fact that you know that's not going to be the case as well. And the job for all of us here, the job for all of us is to try and work out what we do with everybody in society to make sure that everybody actually has a decent standard of living and actually isn't thrown on the scrap heap. And that's what all of us, Steve, Mike and I, are in politics for. Now, you know, it's your choice. I can sit here and lie to you, or you can have the truth. Your choice.
Thank you, Councillor Farron. Councillor Ross, just 30 seconds,
well, just briefly on this issue. I think I'm pleased that what you're saying for the question is that you do want a job when you leave either college or university. I'm pleased that that's the case, and too often it isn't the case for young people. What I would say is that I was sceptical myself when I heard the government say there'll be, was it 2 million new jobs created in the private sector, replacing other jobs lost in the public sector, until I heard this week that actually, in the last 6 months, there's been 300,000 jobs created in the private sector alone, and that's during hard economic times. So I agree the harsh economic reality is there probably isn't going to be employment for all. Those days are over if they ever existed. But I do believe that new jobs will come along and that will present opportunities for people like yourself in this hall.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can go to Stacey Horwood, Cash Group 2, please. Stacey, can you put your hand up?
Do you think young people should be made to take jobs that are available rather than being able to pick and choose?
Thank you. Councillor Brady?
I think there's a bit of both, really. I do certainly when I left school, I just took the first job available, went out to work. It was just a butcher's boy, really, taking errands on a bike and all the rest of it, and working through different jobs to get to where I found that I was doing something that I really liked. And life is a journey, and I think it's the balance between, are you going to be stuck in that job? Do you want to be stuck in that job? It really is up to the individual. If you've got the real strength of character and the impetus to say, this is not for me, I'm going to move on, you have to start somewhere. So the sooner you start, the better, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last one in this category, I'd like to go to Julie Rugg, please.
Will we receive more money for apprenticeships?
Did everybody hear that? Yeah? Will we receive more money for apprenticeships? And I'd like to start off this time, please, with Councillor Ross.
To be honest, I don't know at this stage. We'll have to wait and see. But there is, as I say, a commitment to apprenticeships, both at a national level, I think, the government, also locally as well. The council has a keen commitment on apprenticeships and is doing what it can to get apprenticeships going, both in the city and with the council as well. So I would like to see that this is an area that does expand over future years.
Okay. Anybody else would comment on that one?
No, I think Mike's right that apprenticeships are important because they give a skill. It comes back to the answer we were saying earlier, and that is one of the answers is to skill people up for existing jobs rather than having to import labour necessarily just to do jobs that nobody else wants to do, and also to actually train them for the future. Now that's where the second guessing comes, trying to work out what the future economy needs. But the importance is absolute, and I know that all parties are actually committed to apprenticeship both locally. Heaven knows, I think I opened about 2 apprenticeship studios when I was running around as Lord Mayor, and that is actually important, and that is the way forward.
If I can be the first to ask a question to the audience. Can we just get a view of the audience, split between those who want to do sort of the vocational apprenticeship routes and those who want to go and to university. So who wants to do the apprenticeship and vocational courses next?
You all hold your cards up, please. Who would like to do the vocational apprenticeship routes?
Okay. Fairly clear. Yeah, I think that's... Any for university? Sort of more... One or two?
Oh, but of course you can enter university via an apprenticeship route, Councillor Ross, so of course that option is available to apprenticeships as well.
That's it, but it's good to see that people do want to go and get those skills that will give a variety of different jobs when they leave there.
Great. We'd like to now move on to our next category. Category 2 is the coalition government and what it means. And I'd like to go to Sam Allison for the question again. Please, Sam.
What is a coalition government and what have they done so far to improve the area?
This was a bit easier.
Okay, I'd like to ask each of the panel members, but we will start off with the left-hand side with Councillor Brady.
Go on, Steve.
Well, I'll tell you what the coalition government is. It's a sellout by the Liberal Democrats to back the Conservatives and, to see them all together. My father used to have a word for Liberal Democrats, the washed-out Tories. And as far as I'm concerned, it is the back in their comfort zone, cutting the money to the poor, cutting opportunities for the young. And, a lot of people often wondered, why haven't the Liberal Democrats been in power for 100 years? Well, I think the answer is how you see it today. That's the reason why they haven't been in government for 100 years, because you can't trust them.
Very passionate thought there. Councillor Farron, would you like to comment further?
He practiced that line yesterday in the council chamber. It was much better today, Steve, than yesterday. Disraeli said England doesn't love coalitions, and he may well be right. Certainly Steve doesn't anyway. A coalition government is something that's necessary when Parliament meets and finds the public hasn't given a clear mandate, which it hasn't. It gave a clear mandate, it had enough of Steve Brady and his crew, and kicked them out, but it didn't overwhelmingly love Dave and our crew. So they formed a coalition government. I mean, let's not pretend that Steve's team weren't scurrying around desperately trying to stay in office and form a coalition as well. They were. Now, what have they done to improve the area? At the moment, of course, absolutely little, because they haven't been in for long, and that's our job as local councillors. It's local councils that improve the area. Parliament runs the nation and sets the framework for us all. So if you want to know what's been done, well, ask the Lib Lab coalition that broadly run this city for the last 50 years. Mike?
Well, in my view, a coalition government quite simply is where two parties, in this case at national level, come together to form a government. It doesn't mean the parties have merged, it doesn't mean we now have one party. John and I, our national parties might be in government together, but the way I see it, we're more sharing a house than sharing a bed. The idea that there's now one party is wrong. In terms of what they've done to help Hull, and one of the first things they did was they scrapped the backdated the port taxes, which is actually, I won't for a lot of people necessarily realise how important it is, but for the businesses affected by that, it was actually a very big issue. I think if you look forward in terms of what they're going to be doing, I think things like the people premium will be a big benefit to a city like Hull, and so I think actually the outlook does look good. And the other thing is actually, speaking frankly, there are people in government that we know as Conservative and Liberal Democrat councillors, and we'll be able to have a good relationship with them, probably a lot better, more effective relationship than we were able to have with the last government.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to category 3, which is education, including university places and fees. I'd like to welcome Sophie Hill from Hospitality and Catering to raise her question.
Why is funding being pulled for, extra courses like level 2 food safety? That's being pulled, extra funding for it. The free courses for us, and it's very vital for our future trade sort of thing, and it would be really useful to have them back.
Okay, I'd like to start off this time with Councillor Farron, please.
Well, the honest answer is I'm not sure, because that's a choice made by the college, the principal and everything else. They must choose which courses they put on within the framework. No doubt Steve will say it's all to do with education cuts, and yes, there have been some refinements in the education budget as it's morphed from one area to another. But as to the real reason for why for the course funding being pulled, I'm afraid that's a matter for the college. We have made a commitment as a coalition government to education. We have improved and increased the expenditure in certain areas of it whilst reducing it in others. For example, we have protected the science budgets. And I think it's just one of those areas where it'll be how it's implemented locally will depend on local demand for places and demand for courses. But I do agree with you, the courses you've mentioned are important, and I'm a little surprised myself.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brady, would you like to comment further?
Yeah, I think that the skills in all sectors and things like food, obviously there's a great interest. I mean, that every television station seems to run food programmes, but there's real skills and there's real opportunities. And I don't think that you get a lot of MPs rubbishing these type of courses. Actually, it's skills for life. And I think that it is good that you've got a diversity of how you would tackle, how you would want to move forward in your life. So if people want to move on that front, they may become one of the master chefs in the future. And these people who rubbish these things, I think is awful.
Okay. Councillor Ross?
Well, not a lot more to add to what Councillor Fairham said, really. I think the decisions made by different institutions and colleges and so on are for them to make. But in terms of the principles, why is there less funding now for certain organisations? Well, as John said, Steve would like to blame this government. Well, why is this government taking the actions it's having to take? Locally, as a council group, we had to come in and clean up Labour's mess. At national level, the Conservative and Liberal Democrats are now having to sort out Labour's mess, the mess they left behind after 13 years of neglect.
Okay, quite difference of opinion there, I think. Moving on to our next question in this category, I'd like to invite Joe Strong from Applied Sciences to raise his question, please. Joe?
The question of fairness in the UK has recently been discussed in a report by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Does the panel think that the proposed rise in university tuition fees is fair to those who already have limited opportunities living in an economically deprived areas such as Hull?
Thanks, Joe. I'll repeat that question if I could because the microphone wasn't quite working. Joe asks, the question of fairness in the UK has recently been discussed in a report by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Does the panel think that the proposed rise in university tuition fees is fair to those who have already limited life opportunities living in an economically deprived area such as Hull? And I'd like to start the answers, please, with Councillor Ross.
No. Frankly, no. It's not fair. It's not right. There shouldn't be a rise in tuition fees. Actually, there shouldn't be tuition fees, to be completely honest. I was actually one of the first to go through a university where tuition fees were in place, and I know what an impact it had on people around me. Now, of course, Councillor Fairham said in a council debate we had on this issue yesterday that when he went to university, he ended up in debt as well, and that's before tuition fees. And I appreciate it's always been tough for students, but to add additional burden and debt onto students is frankly wrong, and any proposals to see tuition fees rise is also wrong and unfair.
Thank you. Councillor Fairham?
The first part of the question I'm really not fussed with. I mean, fairness is personal to somebody else. I don't need somebody else to tell me what my moral codes and values are. The second part, as Mike says, I did go through university on £50 a year from Berkshire Council, because apparently we lived in a privileged area, so we were all rich and didn't need the money, and 50 quid a year was enough. I don't happen to agree with tuition fees. I'm struggling to find the tuition fees to do my doctorate, and therefore I do actually feel this myself. I think it is wrong, and it's wrong whether you're in an economically deprived area or not. That's irrelevant. You either place a premium on education or you do not. I believe that if the state says that you're good enough to go to a higher education institution, the state should pick up the cost of paying that, because it'll get it back in the increased taxes that most graduates get anyway. So I think there's a degree of intellectual inconsistency at the heart of government on this point, and I slightly separate myself from my front bench on this point.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question then, students? Does anybody in the room actually think that the rise in tuition fees are fair? Please use your voting cards.
Well, one person does. No, two. Hey, three.
I didn't comment on that, did I?
No, you didn't. Would you like to comment?
I would like to comment.
He's impossible to shut up when he wants to go.
What hypocrisy from the Liberal Democrats, who based the whole of their, if you like, charge of trying to get into government, one of the major planks was, we are against tuition fees. What is the very first thing they do? Agree to that for the cap to be removed and for huge increases to go on the very people that they caused it up to before the election. It's a disgrace.
Thank you. If I could just take the opportunity to remind panel members that I won't be able to ask every single my panel member for a comment for all of the questions because we have a lot to get through, but thank you for those comments. Could I invite Emma Linley to raise her question, please?
Didn't see this one coming, did you, Mike?
How can the Liberal Democrats justify their election manifesto which stated that they were going to abolish tuition fees in the light of the fact that now they are in government, they are allowing universities to charge what they want? Isn't this misleading the Liberal Democrat voters?
Should I take this one?
I think you better.
I think, well, first of all, I stood at the general election. I was a candidate and I signed the pledge, and if I was now in Parliament I would be sticking to that pledge. I think actually it's important, if you make a public commitment like that you follow it up. There are a few points I would make though. First of all, the decision actually hasn't yet been taken. The report commissioned by the last Labour government has not yet actually been fully digested, so there's still some work to be done. I don't think Liberal Democrats should now be putting through a rise in tuition fees. I'm very clear about that. And I don't think actually, if it was a purely Liberal Democrat government, they would be either. I think they'd be finding other ways of delivering on that pledge. I think we do have to recognise the situation we're in. I think it's interesting though, we still haven't really heard from Councillor Brady what his alternative is. We know from Ed Miliband he favours a graduate tax alternative that unfortunately though would actually potentially hit the poorest people even more over the long term. And I also understand that if you had that sort of system, you couldn't charge it on foreign students, so they would be able to pay their fees up front, which would mean other people would have to be able to do so legally as well. So you could actually have the perverse situation where those who could afford to paid tuition fees up front and get it over and done with, and others, the poorer people, paying up more over the long run, which I don't think is fair either.
Thank you. Councillor Brady, would you like to comment further on that question?
Well, on top of that, you've got a double whammy where they're proposing to abolish the educational maintenance allowance. And I travel on bus every day, and I see all you students on the bus and getting off and having to pay up to what, £2.50, £3 a day. And it's that very payment that actually allows people to go to college. And as I say, to take away that grant on top of what they're doing on tuition fees, well, I think it's a clear message to young people. The Liberal Democrats have got no time for young people, and I think it's a disgrace that the education and maintenance allowance, which Labour brought in, is being removed.
Thank you for that, and that actually moves us along quite nicely to our next category, which is actually EMA. So I would like to invite Sarah Sunman from the Cash Group to raise her question, please. Sorry, Tara Sunman.
Why don't we get our EMA bonus anymore?
Okay, I'd like to start this time with Councillor Ross and then Councillor Farron, please.
I think this is clearly a very major subject. I understand why the concerns are there, and I think there's changes in this area. Actually, I would agree with Steve for sort of first time really. I think the idea that this education measure announced is of concern, but I think we do have to recognise where we are as well, and some tough choices are having to be made at this time. And I think it's problematic that we're hearing a lot as usual. It's like in a council meeting really with Councillor Brady today, that we're hearing a lot of hot air and sort of grandstanding, but not really hearing any alternatives. We're not really hearing any plans, because frankly Labour don't really have any plans actually. There is, unfortunately, we're in a tough situation and tough choices are going to have to be made.
Okay, Councillor Farron.
I think it's important to remember that for more years there hasn't been an education maintenance allowance than there has. It's only, as Steve says, it's something they introduced and it's only relatively recent. I think the key question is to turn it round and go, how can we achieve the same thing via different routes? It is time to actually start discussing, especially with people like Stagecoach, who make multiple millions of pounds profits out of the public purse generally, on the grounds that we're usually propping up their bus routes and making sure that they continue their very profitable national duopoly, that they should be actually looking at their fees and whether or not they're prepared to start giving student concessions. The answer that the state has to supply everything is not one that has ever struck much resonance with me for philosophical reasons, and possibly not so much for Mike either. And we've got to find alternative ways of funding the same thing, because I do agree with Steve's point about the cost of bus travel to actually learn, and if that's becoming a barrier, we have to find alternative routes, and that sometimes means, if you'll forgive the pun, and that sometimes means that people like the bus companies, like the college, are going to have to look at whether this is something that they want to set up a charitable reimbursement for, and other charitable routes of funding.
Okay. Still in EMA theme, I'd like to invite Jess Sweeting from National Diploma Business to comment further, please.
Okay. Shouldn't everybody get EMA regardless of the financial situations?
Thank you. Councillor Brady.
I think it is a difficult one, this. What I would like to see is the EMA 1, it is not removed, and certainly for it to be increased, because I don't think it is enough. But where you've got cities where the children of very wealthy parents are getting it, I think there's a doubt about that. And I think parents can support the children wherever necessary, but certainly in Hull, I don't think that £30 is enough, because you know how quick £10 goes, and it leaves very little for enjoyment and being able to do the things in life that you also want to do out of college time.
Thank you. One final comment on the EMA from Owen Hyde, which is wrapping up the two elements that have already been discussed. Owen?
Why do we only get £30 when most people live further away and it costs more on the buses? Me myself, I live in Wivington, it costs me £6 every year to get on the bus, and also about the £100 bonus, I'd need that so I can pay for my travel.
Okay, thank you, Owen.
Twice as well.
Sorry?
Twice as well, and all my uniform colleagues.
Did you hear that last said, and for the chef's whites as well? Councillor Ross, do you want to leave?
Well, I think the reasons why it's like it is because of the way it was set up by the previous government, frankly. I mean, that's the rules they set out and stand. So, it's how to do it. I think it's not unusual, actually, that they would set up a scheme but without necessarily thinking through how it needs to be done. And that's it's fair of all governments, really. That's not a general point about Labour. It's just the way things happen, and they don't always ever take into account those local situations like you described there. But I just want to pick up in terms of the previous question as well, in terms of why should every student get an email. Speaking frankly, I was quite lucky in my upbringing. I had a dad who was a GP, so it wasn't the GP earnings of today by any means. It was a few years ago. I was able to sort of pay for my own travel as well when I need to go to college. So if we'd been getting EMA, then I think actually it wouldn't have been fair to have seen, because fundamentally there's limited money to go around, and I'd rather see it spent on those who need it rather than necessarily to help me go to college in those days.
Okay. I'd like to move on now to category 5, which is raising local concerns. And our first question comes from Jamie Mackling from Plumbing. Jamie, can you make yourself seen, please?
How come Hull, more than other places in England, is seen as the worst place to live? What can be done to improve this?
Did everybody hear Jamie's question? How come Hull, more than other places in England, is seen as the worst place to live, and what can be done to improve this? And I'd like to take Councillor Brady first of all, please.
I think Hull's a great place to live. We're obviously lacking in good quality jobs, and that's something that we should all councillors want to address in bringing new modern industry to the city, and I think there's real chances over the next few years that we might do that. But all this comes from the snobs down south about Hull. And
that's you and I, Mike.
And the one thing that people notice about Hull is that people are really direct in what they say. They do appreciate the Hull humour, And I think it's a very warm place to live, and I think the people are second to none in this country.
Thank you. Still on local concerns, can I ask Kaylee Darcy to raise her question, please?
I am concerned about the lack of safe play areas that are available for children in home. What can be done to improve this?
Did everybody hear that question? I will repeat it. I'm concerned about the lack of safe play areas that are available for children in Hull. What can be done to improve this? And I'd like to ask Councillor Farron, please.
Well, Kaylee, I'm interested in this because I'd like to know what you think the unsafe play areas are in Hull, where they all are. Because I chair the Pearson Park Trust, which my colleague Councillor Ross is on, which is the oldest and the second biggest park in Hull after East Park, which I believe Councillor Brady chairs something on. And the figures that we get, and I've also refurbished a park in my own wards with play equipment, Cropton Park, just near Cottingham. And none of those parks have actually had incidents of unsafety, except Pearson Park had one incident very late on, about 4 o'clock in the morning, about something which could have happened anywhere, unfortunately, and is quite a common problem in that respect. But it wasn't confined to the fact it was in a park. It was just that's where that unfortunate thing happened. So they are actually quite safe, and I think I'd be really interested to hear your views about why you think they're not safe, because actually all the figures show that we have some of the safest parks in the country.
In most parks, it's like you get like druggies and chavs and stuff, and like the vandal and things like that.
Could I have a microphone, please? Because
I have to agree with you. What Kaylee was saying was that in most parks you have chavs and druggies and they get vandalised. I don't think I've misquoted her disaccurately. Well, the chavs are chavs, and as long as they're not causing any harm, they're entitled to their lifestyle, I suppose, although I don't really get it. But each to their own. The druggies are something of a problem. Certainly at Pearson Park, there is a period of time when it shifts over from being a family park and 1 or 2 drug people do go into it. But frankly, you see that when you're walking around the city centre. You see it down alleyways and down the path of nightclubs in Hull as well. This is sorry.
Little children and like people like who can take the children to go to play at the park and not get harassed or anything by teenagers or people who are like not nice in a way.
Just to I'd say one of the best ways actually to get parks being safe is to get them used more. Actually, the more these places are used for the purpose they're meant to be used for, I should say, the safer they are. I think the other thing to say is, we as a council committed to investing in parks across the city. There was some funding that came that was halted by this government, but we've committed to keep that money going. So there will be investment in parks in the city over the next year or so. The other thing to say is, if they're in your local area, if there are parks that you have concerns about, then approach your local councillors and they will see what they can do to help out with that as well.
I think there's quite a lot of interest in your comments there, Kelly. So perhaps at the end you could stay behind and have a chat with the councillors over a cup of coffee. That would be useful. If I could ask...
Especially if you're paying.
Zoe Hagan, can you raise your comment, please? Thank you. Down here.
Since the floods, it doesn't seem as though many drains have been cleaned out. What is the situation with this at the moment?
Thank you, Zoe. Over to Councillor Ross.
This is clearly an issue that over the last few years has been a lot of concern to local residents, and I can well understand why. I mean, I remember having to walk back on the day of the floods, and the scenes were quite horrific across the city. What I would say, though, in terms of the response since then is, there has been quite extensive cleaning out of drains taking place the last few years. When you sort of go around the city, you might see the signs go up and lampposts that say, in this area, in these dates, the drains will be swept out. Please keep your cars away so that it can take place. And that work is, it's a programmed work. It's scheduled to take place. I think it's something like every 6 months it gets around to the streets again. So it is taking place. And in fact, I think it's a lot faster than it ever has been before in the city as well. Okay.
Just on the similar theme, really, we're moving on to category 6, which is our green issues, sustainability and recycling theme. And I'd like to invite Laura Hampton from Cash Group 2 to raise her question, please.
Do you think that enough is being done to help people recycle household rubbish or unwanted items?
Okay. Councillor Brady?
I think, to be fair, I think that the Liberal Democrat Council in Hull have done quite well on this, and I think the recycling rates are going up really, at a steady increase now. Every family in the city have got a duty to do things for the environment, and they can't just leave it up to councils. It is up to individual households, and also to the large supermarkets. Now, I can never understand why they aren't forced, when they actually build a supermarket, that there is a recycling centre on site, that they actually recycle their own rubbish. And I found that quite strange, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Can I ask a question of the audience, please? Can you let me know if you recycle on a regular basis? Excellent. That's very positive to see. Thank you. If we can move on then, please, in the same theme. Can I ask Laura Bailey to raise her question, please? Where's Laura? Laura? Thank you.
Why are East Yorkshire buses more expensive to travel on than stagecoach buses?
Okay, I'm not quite sure the panel will be able to answer fully on that question. Thank you, Laura, but perhaps Councillor Farron, would you like a start?
Thanks. As you say, it's not really in our competence too, but applying standard economics and A-level economics, the Globe brothers who run Stagecoach are multi-millionaires living in a castle in Scotland and funding some very interesting homophobic campaigns and other sort of stuff out of their profits, so you might want to think about that. Whereas Peter Shipp lives in a fairly reasonable sized house locally and it is a local company. They can't defray their costs and their expenditure over so many parts of the country as Stagecoach can, which is a national company. Therefore, they can get the unit cost of buying their buses down. They aren't as generous in terms of their pay. I mean, I'm not suggesting that any bus driver is particularly well paid, but I understand that East Yorkshire pays slightly more to their drivers. And they do tend to, and in this area, at least they do tend to have more modern buses. Whereas this part of the country seems to be the end of the line for all Stagecoach buses, so that might be it.
Okay. Councillor Ross, do you want to add anything to that debate?
Well, I think, yeah, in a sense, the only thing I'd add to that is sort of market forces and it's capitalist economy, and so they will charge different prices in an economic competition. I think it's not for me to necessarily comment whether one is better than another in terms of the service it provides, but I think it's market forces.
Okay. Final one in this category. I'd like to invite Gary Somerset to raise his question, please.
Why is it taking so long to fill the potholes in the roads? This is dangerous, especially for people who use bikes.
Did everybody hear that question? Okay, thank you. Councillor Ross.
Well, I mean, yes, well, I'm privileged to have the portfolio for fixing potholes in the last year or so. And actually, I'd say we're actually doing a much better job on this issue than ever before in Hull. We, as a council, a year or so ago, set up a special team. We know it slightly differently to what the officers know. We call it the pothole busting team. They go out, and essentially, they go around filling in potholes across the city. And because of that, we've managed to reduce the length of time it takes to fill in potholes from weeks and weeks and weeks down to a matter of days. So the other thing I'd say about it is previously, and without us getting too technical, potholes had to be a certain depth before they could be filled in, and we've said no, just fill in a hole, just go and make the road safe, so actually they're in a good condition, people can use them safely.
Well, I did make a suggestion that the giant toads around the city should be stuck in the potholes and be called Toad in the Hole.
Yes, we have a question from the floor. Can you just hang on a second, we'll get the microphone to you and catch your question.
What about potholes on the Spring Bank?
What about the potholes on Spring Bank? Is that to directly?
By anyone.
By anyone?
Yeah, if the potholes I'll take that back to the officers later and get them to go down. Can I ask which stretch of Spring Bank?
Spring Bank, the one with all the shops on.
Again, if you want to stay behind at the end, you can be a little bit more precise in your description. We've got another question from the floor. This is, again, Jamie Macklin from Plumbing had a question I think that he wanted to raise.
It's keen, isn't it?
Why are you increasing the retirement age from any? This means it will be harder for me and others to find a job.
Did you hear Jamie's question? It's about why we're increasing the retirement age. So I'd like to start off this time, please, with Councillor Fairham.
I think as life expectancy increases, so it becomes more likely that people are going to want to work longer. I mean, I look at my grandfather, and when he was in his 60s, he was worn out and barely capable. and really, he'd had enough. His health was breaking down. He didn't live that long after 65. Whereas now, you can be quite fit and virile and endlessly producing children and God knows what in your 60s nowadays. I mean, I look at Mike's father, for example, but there you go, moving swiftly on.
He's 51, I think.
Oh, sorry. So I think it will make it longer, and people are living longer, and though some, not all, are wanting to work longer. But to move to the point of your question, I think it's going to have to be that whether or not those people work full-time as they get past the retirement age, because you are right, there's only a finite number of jobs to go around, and yes, if they all stay in their jobs, it will make it more difficult at the other end of the scale. So I think we may have to look as a government at whether or not people who work later because they want to and they can should necessarily be working full-time. And in fact, actually, I personally think that the era of the 9 till 5, 35-hour week will be lucky to see out my lifetime as a standard economic model of practice.
Councillor Brady, did you want to come?
No, well, I've just reached retirement age.
Feel free to go.
And I got a letter from them after working for 50 years from 15 to 65 to ask me if I'd like to delay it. Now, as far as I'm concerned, 50 years of contributions entitles me to a measly sum of just over £100 a week. And if they think I'm going to delay it, and they said that they would give me a cash lump sum at the end of when I was 66. Well, if I put my clogs in the middle, I don't get anything back. So I think we're the 5th richest country in the world, and the one thing I think it's just a plot by the establishment to take what is rightfully theirs, the people who've worked all their life. And I think it's absolute rubbish about this people living longer. Yeah, and when they do, they end up in a care home, sat round in a circle, listening to Max Bargrades.
Thank you, Councillor Brady. If I can ask for a vote, who actually thinks that working longer and actually delaying retirement is a good thing? Please use your voting card. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a mixed group there, so that's very interesting. Thank you. We've just got time for a couple of quick questions before we finish. There is no actual person to ask these questions, so I'll raise them on behalf of the student body. The first one, which I think all councillors would like to answer, is what are the plans for Hull in the future? And I'd like to start off, please, with Councillor Brady.
Who's in opposition?
Well, if we just look at what Hull did, I mean, two of the big iconic things in Hull really is the stadium, which the Labour Council built at the time, which ended up with a Premiership football team I had for a short period of time, and the Deep, and we're imaginative and we do things that's right for the city. There was huge objections from the opposition parties saying that it was a waste of 43 million. In fact, it's been a fine example of forward thinking. So I like to think we set our stall out on that, and with many plans for the future when we dispose of this lot next year's elections.
Thank you. Councillor Fair.
Well, our plans are laid out in our election manifesto, which is resoundingly dropped every year. They've taken it in turns forming a council and I don't. My vision, because I have no plans, because I'm not in power nor anywhere near it, there's only two of us, is for a healthier and a wealthier and a better housed Hull. I think those are the key requirements, that people should have food in their stomach, a decent roof over their house, and enough money left over from their day-to-day bills to actually enjoy a tolerable standard of leisure activity. The plans for that is not necessarily for me, it's for me as a politician to create the framework that allows you to achieve that, and that gives you the opportunity to do it. It's not for me to give you that. We will supply the safety net, we should supply a safety net, but at the end of the day it's my job to provide a light touch framework that means you can make of yourselves what you want to make, as is quite clear by the quality of your questions, that you've actually got a vision and aspirations for the future, and I for one am very grateful to all of you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross?
I think it's very interesting that Councillor Brady talks about A, the past, and B, physical buildings that in answering this question. I think for me it's much more than that. It's about what you want it to be, what the people of the city want the city to be in the future. But always be cautious around people promising grand visions, and the other thing is don't necessarily just rely on the council to do it. We have to do this collectively as a city. That means the council, it means yourselves, it means anybody who has an interest in this city. And so really it's a question for the audience as well. What do people want the city to be?
Would anybody like to make some suggestions while the panel are still here today?
Stop wasting money on stupid things like the frogs when you could be spent somewhere different with more approval of it. You could wipe that somewhere else.
Did everybody hear that question? There was a challenge about the investment in the turds, I think they are.
Well, if I can just comment on this, I think he's right. I think the council shouldn't have spent any money on turds. In fact, the council didn't spend any money on turds. So I think the decision was right not to do that. What it also proved actually is that where there are schemes like that to come along, there will be groups in the city and elsewhere who want to invest in them. And the fact that business groups and so on and private individuals sponsored those turds to be made was a good thing. I think it was a good thing for the city though. I think actually if you look around the last few months and see people walking around the city with the maps out, going around, looking at the city and finding different parts of the city out as a result of that, is a good thing. But what was good for me was that actually it was done through private individuals and sponsorship from business.
I think it tells you something that all we've got to do is, all we've got for our leisure time is to go looking at big fat turds.
Okay, Councillor Farron, any comment on the turds?
No.
Okay, we've got time for one last question, I think, and I'd like to raise it again on behalf of the student body. Clubs, pubs shouldn't be allowed to open as late as they are, as this is causing too much trouble. And I'd like to ask Councillor Brady to lead off on that one, please.
Well, I think the way this government are going about already after a few months, I think it's going to solve the problem because you won't have no money to go in the pubs.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ross?
I have enjoyed this morning. I'd like to put that on record as well. It's been a pleasure being here with you this morning. I particularly enjoyed Councillor Brady's contribution. It's coming to a theatre near you soon, I think. It's as if the last 13 years of Labour government haven't really happened. But in terms of the issue around clubs and pubs, I agree. I represent Newland Avenue area. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with it. And what is great about the area is that there are pubs around, restaurants around, and there are things to do in the evening, and that is good for the local economy. But what is also a concern is how they are perhaps operated, or how some of the clientele operates, as it were, when they leave the premises, and that does cause concern to the residents I represent. And so there does need to be a sensible solution to this. Whether for some of them it's around they close earlier, or whether we make sure that they're no more opened. There's different ways of tackling this problem. But I do recognise it is a concern, and particularly to those who are just basically trying to get a good night's sleep.
Okay, and final comment, Councillor Farron?
Yeah, I live on Earl Street, right next to Zest, and I tend to get a lot of this problem, but I don't link the two statements together. The fact that the clubs and pubs are opening late is not necessarily causing the problem. The problem is the people who are using it and the licensees who aren't necessarily enforcing their terms of the licence. I go in there at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning for a drink. It doesn't mean I'm causing a problem. It usually doesn't. I get a front page headline if I did, I expect. And why shouldn't I be able to take a drink there when I want to? It's something I happen to agree with the previous Labour government about liberalising the licensing laws. It's about individual responsibility. That does not mean to say that if a particular place, and we all know them, we all fought the fight about fuel and shine, I think, if my memory serves rightly, if they're consistently contributing to this problem by serving underage drinkers drinking too much, then take away their licence and close them down. Don't necessarily penalise all of us. And part of this is for the police to do as well. It's a police and licensing enforcement issue. I don't think you should shut the baby out of the bathwater.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time this morning. I'm sure you would like to join with me in thanking our panel members for their time this morning.